All right. What up? What up? What up, everybody? Welcome to Believe in Rams, presented by FanDuel. EC back with you. It's been, 4 days from the NFL draft? I'm terrible at math. We all know that. But I'm joined, of course, always co-host, analyst, Rams Super Bowl champion, offensive tackle, Rob Havenstein, and a special guest today, the Athletics insider, beat writer for the Rams, Nate Atkins. Gentlemen, I'm excited to kind of chat with both of you. The Rams have been in the news, in the headlines since the NFL draft, since McVay's demeanor, which I thought, addressed it very well, day two. But I haven't seen Rob. I haven't gotten Rob's take on how he's kind of packaged and his interpretation of the five guys, only five guys, but according to Les, five solid guys. So let's jump in and ask Rob, what's your sort of takeaway overall picture from the Rams draft this year?
Yeah, it's not exactly what everyone, especially some of the more experts, kind of thought it would be. But when you look back at it and kind of digest it a little bit, it does make a lot of sense. Especially talking about, obviously the big headline, the QB in the first round. As you kind of unpack that a little bit, and obviously Les and Sean have a plan, but then you kind of go down the list of everyone, and they've all played really good ball throughout their college careers. And I think one thing you're going to notice a trend is that they played a lot of college ball. So they're older guys coming in, maybe a little bit more experience. But yeah, overall, I thought it was exactly what Les said, five solid dudes. And I think each one of them has a expected role that they're going to come in and fill in. And then if that comes to fruition, then, Les and Sean are going to look like geniuses.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, what's interesting is now that I've sort of, like you said, unpacked, we've all kind of digested it. I've taken to the Insta and the Twitter peeps and just kind of said, I think we can pump the brakes now. We sort of now understand why the picks were made. And the behavior behind why there was so much dialogue about McVay's. Now I feel much better. And I also mentioned the fact that none of the rookies in the last couple of years, certainly with a Blake Corum and a Terrence Ferguson and even Jarquez, the rookies don't really see playing time. Anyways, Nate, now that you kind of have had some time to digest, where do you feel like fans are at today? And what's your sort of overall sense of what the Rams did with their draft?
Yeah, it's been interesting since Thursday night. It's such a long wait to get to the draft that any guy they pick, there's going to be all these opinions one way or another about. And then that pick, to take a backup quarterback of the future at 13 was surprising, and a little bit of an odd press conference. But I think we've all kind of started to wrap our heads around it for the most part. I've seen a lot better fan reactions in the past few days. People are getting back to trusting Sean McVay and Les Snead, and they've earned that track record to have a lot of trust. And I think when you kind of start to see, like Les Snead has talked a lot when he's gone on these different shows about how they didn't view the 13th pick in a vacuum, which goes against just our nature of there's one pick on Thursday night. We're all going to react just to that one pick and what that means. Instead, I think they look at the overall picture, and they really what it came down to for me was with that pick specifically, they looked at the first round as a two-player first round, and they sent the first pick at 29 to get Trent McDuffie, which is the ultimate swing for the impact player, the biggest position in need, and a very expensive player. So at 13, they come back and they take a quarterback of the future that is less about impacting this season, but in the long haul, they're going to get to a point whenever that time comes that Ty Simpson is a starter at, I think he's going to make $6.5 million on average. That's $42 million less than Matthew Stafford made last season. So when you combine that with the McDuffie move, you can kind of see how they're trying to fit this whole puzzle together and be able to afford it and afford a lot of good free agents that are coming up that they're just not sure how they can keep everybody. So it was a bit of a curveball draft just because we thought they would go for the positions you seem to need the most. I think the way they looked at it was there wasn't one position they needed incredibly high. That was cornerback, and that's what Trent McDuffie and Jalen Watson were about. This was more about get a plan for the future, and also answer some important depth spots. Like they found, I think, an offensive line, wide receiver, defensive line. So I didn't quite see, some of the positions they went after, but I'm also not shocked that they decided to whittle it down to a 5-person draft class, because on one hand, this was not considered a very strong or deep draft. A lot of players coming back to college because of NIL deals that are more incentivized than Rob would have liked to have some NIL deals back in the day, but the calculus
would have been fine.
Yeah, a little different calculus. And then also, and Rob can speak to it, it's hard to make the Rams right now, the roster, if you're a day 3 pick. And you saw last year they spent a 4th-round pick on Jarquez Hunter, and he basically redshirted the season just because you've got Kyron Williams and Blake Corum. So I think they just looked at certain positions and thought, rather than draft a player who may be very good but just doesn't really have a way to get on the field, let's find specific important depth roles and also plan for the future. And I think the way they look at it is the actual impact swings that they want to take. Those come in free agency and trades. And I don't think that process is done. I think they're going to continue to be active as they get to the trade deadline, because as we've seen, this team, when they see a Super Bowl in their sights, they tend to do some things that'll push, the ball forward toward that. And so the draft didn't feel that way necessarily, but that's just one piece of the overall puzzle, and there's a long way to go.
And I think, to me, the longer I sort of understand the mindset of Sean and Les, the more I actually think Rams fans should feel comforted, right? The fact that they spent their highest draft pick that they may have for the foreseeable future, we can't assume that the Rams are going to have a 13th overall pick. Otherwise, they're going to have to trade a lot of draft capital to get that high again. To me, says and suggests, which is the thing that you wrote about, Nate, they feel good about their team that they have now. They believe that the team that they have now suggests a Super Bowl roster winning team moving forward. And if you're going to get a guy that's going to fill the shoes one day of a Matthew Stafford and a Sean McVay, wouldn't you spend the highest draft pick you might have for a long time? It made sense when you bring in guys like Cliff Kingsbury and you sort of change around your offensive coaching identity so that maybe, I'm not sure, but I'll ask you that, Nate. Do you think that that's going to be maybe priority 1, 2, 3 for Cliff Kingsbury to kind of hone in on a Ty Simpson?
Yeah, I think that's definitely an element that he's going to bring. This is a guy that played quarterback in the league. He's developed Kyler Murray and Jaden Daniels. He's kind of been in this spot with the young rookie trying to learn the league. I think Cliff's role is also bigger than that. He's the assistant head coach. And so this is a former head coach within the division that can kind of fill that role that Aubrey Pleasant had last season as the assistant head coach. They like to have a few different voices like that. But this is just about the best landing spot that a quarterback can come to if you're not going to start in the league, to sit behind Matthew Stafford, to have Sean McVay as your head coach, to have Cliff Kingsbury and Nathan Shieldhouse working with you, and to be able to patiently wait for an opportunity where whenever that time comes for Ty Simpson, you would expect this team to still be quite talented. A lot of these rookies get drafted into spots where the team was bad enough to take them high, and then they put them out there very quickly, and it doesn't come together. I had just covered that in Indianapolis where the Colts took Anthony Richardson, number 4 overall, and it was exciting to get this super athlete player, but he'd only had 13 starts in college. They threw him out there before he was ready, before their offense was ready, and they really regretted that. They regretted it really hard about 5 starts in, and it's just hard to get that toothpaste back in the tube once you do that. You don't want to ever have to bench a quarterback that you told everyone was the face, and that raises concerns about the relationships. They're trying to give him this more comfortable on-ramp, and they also found a player in Ty that seems to really embrace that learning process. He's the rare quarterback that stayed at Alabama for years as a backup, and that just doesn't happen anymore in college football. But this is the son of a college football coach, and he seems as fired up as ever to come here and learn. And I don't know that everyone would be that way. There are some quarterbacks that think, if you're going to draft me, I want to play right now, and that's all they've kind of ever known. I think Ty is pretty uniquely wired to embrace that. He seems as fired up as I could have possibly imagined. So I think it is a very good situation for him. Just the interesting thing will be to see how long that on-ramp is. It's at least a year, but nobody knows the answer to that because that's going to be up to Matthew Stafford. And I don't think he fully knows the answer because it's going to just depend on how the year goes, how the body ages, what they end up accomplishing and just how much longer he wants to do this. He's earned the right to sort of control how his career ends. And that's not going to, he's not going to base that decision, I don't think, on Ty Simpson. He's going to base it on himself and his family, but it just puts them in a bit of a waiting game. But I think for them, they would rather get it this a year early and, play that waiting game rather than the other way around, where if Stafford had retired and everyone in the world knows they need a quarterback and they're picking, 29, 30, 31, 32 in a draft, in any quarterback that Sean McVay expresses interest in, the whole league is going to perk up and think we should be interested in that, which kind of explains why they did the kind of secret meetings with him. They didn't want that to really be out there because that's just, you see the whole league is trying to hire every assistant Sean McVay has. So if he's into a quarterback in the draft, you could see where that would become a race as well. So since the days have unfolded, I've understood the process more. It's still interesting for a team that is trying to push for a Super Bowl to spend the highest pick in 10 years on that position. But from a team building standpoint, from a long-term standpoint, you can see why they wanted to go at this a year early rather than a year late.
Well, and the other thing that was really interesting too, Rob, obviously we heard several times throughout the draft, obviously inside the media room, Nate, when we were in there, Sean McVay, this is Matthew Stafford. He couldn't have said it enough times to really make sure to hit home the respect value of, hey, this is for when you do decide to leave. And that all made a ton of sense. This isn't against Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford has as long of a leash as he wants to feel he can do it and commit to it and want to win. But how does this bringing in a quarterback to essentially replace you impact the dynamic of a locker room? And I know Stafford is like such a pro and handles business like a pro, but does it change the dynamic? Like you were there when they swapped, but then also you were there when they drafted Jared Goff too. So does it impact the locker room, or do you foresee it in any way changing because now Ty Simpson is in the Rams locker room?
Yeah, I mean, now that you mention it, it can for sure. I mean, when Jared got drafted, 1 overall, everyone knew it was just kind of when is it going to happen? It's going to happen this year. Is it, first game, second game, third game? But that's not the case right now. You have Super Bowl winning reigning MVP Matthew Stafford back there. Like no one's asking that question like seriously. They might wonder, be like, oh, I wonder how long Matthew plays because I ask myself that all the time. He's done everything you can do in the league. He's an awesome teammate. He's a great competitor. He's won a Super Bowl. He's won an MVP at 54 years of age or however old he is now. Like the guy's playing unbelievable ball, and so bringing in a quarterback this high for Matthew, I think, really does nothing except maybe have a couple fun jokes inside the locker room. Matthew's going to go out there and continue to do what he's done for the last, 18 seasons. It's not going to change just because I think everybody who knows Matthew knows what type of dog Matthew is. And it's not really going to change the team at all, I don't think. And like the number one thing is, even though they drafted him 13th overall, if he's not ready this year to be the backup quarterback, and say Stenson's going to be the backup quarterback. Like Les made it very painfully clear that everyone has to come in and earn their keep, and so that's something they expect Ty to do. And I'm assuming that they expect Ty to become the backup quarterback this year. But at the end of the day, it's got to be earned. But yeah, that's a good point because I've seen a lot of transition of quarterbacks and. This is a completely different situation than what we had back in 2016.
Do you feel, Nate, that the Rams handled it the right way when you think about now there's, now the story has swapped from, okay, they drafted a quarterback to eventually replace and take over for Matthew Stafford when Matthew Stafford is ready to leave. But then the story has shifted into, it's okay for Ty Simpson, I think he went on, was it the Pat McAfee show today, and kind of said, it's okay to say that we had these secret meetings. So I don't know if there's a right way to do this. I actually always kind of side with the Rams front office in the way that I see them trying to be respectful and also competitive, which is why I say to Rams fans, you guys should like these moves. They're not trying to purposefully, put themselves in a disadvantage. But do you think that it was handled in a way that we kind of ended up discussing McVay's demeanor more than we actually ended up talking about the actual players they drafted?
Yeah, I think there's an important thing here to separate the optics of the pick from the logic behind it. I think we're seeing in the days since that there was a lot of logic and planning that went into this long-term team building timeline-wise at the quarterback position. That makes a lot of sense. I think if you were to ask most of the people in that building, I think they have regrets of how they handled the optics of it just in the moment. And it is tricky. They're taking a quarterback for the first time since Jared Goff this high. It's the first time ever that Matthew Stafford has had a team draft a guy that they plan to eventually be the starter. And there is a relationship element to it. I think what you're seeing right now is with Sean McVay and Les Snead, they're going on all these different programs, whether it's Pat McAfee or Jim Rome or NFL Network. I think they're explaining more of what I think they wish they had explained the night of. And we'll never know exactly why it went down that way. Sean said other things outside the job had kind of affected his mood. I think there's a whirlwind aspect to it. You're getting right up there to explain this pick that so much went into, and you're trying to distill it down to certain points. But I think looking back, I think there were a few points I think they wish they had made just a little earlier about, the ability to be aggressive in trades later in the season, and that they will be going after those impact players. And, I think they wish, at least I wish they had revealed the secret meetings at the time, because that alone, I think, would have explained the McVay thing. There just wasn't a sense in the moment on Thursday night how much Sean really knew about Ty. You assume that he did, of course, but we just didn't really get it there. And I just think to have heard a little bit about the meetings and the fact that, Les Snead said they talked for hours and they just nerded out on football. And Sean loves to do that. And you can see Ty seems like a guy that loves to do that. You can see how there's a connection there, and that connection's going to mean everything in the future. That's the connection that Sean has with Matthew. And so optically, I do think they have some regrets, but the most important thing with this is the pick right, was the logic behind the pick right. That over time is going to kind of overpower some of the messaging, and they're putting their efforts in now to try to get that messaging back on point. And I think for the most part, they can't take Thursday night and the optics of it all back, but I think the messages they're putting out now and the way they've responded to it, I think has been pretty good, and lets people kind of feel reassured that this was a cohesive plan, a plan everyone was on board with, and they like what they did, and obviously it'll take years for us to know exactly the results of it. That's the unique part of this pick, is there's not going to be this immediate, judgment day. Not that there is for any rookie, but especially this one. So this is a front office, though, that in a coaching staff that I think has earned, certainly obviously a long leash, but also some benefit of the doubt that they don't just do things kind of out of nowhere and hope they work. There is a plan here, and then we'll just have to see years down the line how well that plan works.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you interpreted it, but Rob, when some of this stuff started to come out, and certainly on social media, they weren't actually accurately reporting Sean McVay's reaction. So they were splicing his conversation that he had with Stafford, which was, I'll keep that to myself. We were in the media room, but then some people were taking it and running with it, that was how he felt about Ty Simpson. So his behavior was actually, I'm going to keep my conversations with my quarterback to myself. And I couldn't believe the twist of that narrative, as though that had anything to do with Ty Simpson. That was to me, how I interpret it, complete reverence for a guy that is still on the team and still revered and still wanting to play, while also making space and room to have respect for this. So did you think about how that must have been a challenging place for McVay, and you know him so well, to be in, to kind of like maneuver that, I guess it's what makes him great at what he does, but also when you do that, people want to have speculations. Did you just find that like crazy that all this was getting so kind of overblown?
Yeah, no, I found it hilarious. I mean, I really did, kind of getting on and watching all the reactions and the different slices. I did see that one where it's, they're talking about the pick. He's like, I'm gonna keep that to myself. I'm like, wait a second, that's not even a little bit of the context of that. Like I said before on our podcast, of that when he gave that answer, I thought it was the exact right answer. Of listen, like that's our conversation. It's private. Like it's not anybody's business but me and Matthew's. And I was like, yeah, I didn't even pay it a second attention. So like, yeah, that should be the answer. That's exactly what I expect from Sean, and for him to have a personal conversation like that, but then to have it spliced in like that, it was just, honestly, kind of laughable.
I was like, what's going on here? Have you been in touch with, and have you been in touch with anybody from the team? Any sort of like reactions, or have you spoken to Stafford? I mean, what's the pulse of your friends or your peeps over there?
Yeah, no, I mean, I haven't spoken too much. I was talking to Coleman a little bit, but I was really just, hey, how's the first week of OTAs? It was nothing crazy because, I mean, like you said, everything gets built up for the draft, and people get to talk about the draft and what should they do, where should they go, and then it happens, and everybody, it's kind of like politics. Half the people are upset that you didn't take their guy, and the other half are excited you took his guy, and so then you get, you have something to talk about after. But it's for the guys in the building. I know they're just being like, hey, how can I improve myself? Like there's no one's reached out to me. I didn't reach out to anyone just because I knew, like, having been through 10 drafts, being a player on the team, it's like, all right, who they pick, cool, hope he's a good guy, hope he works hard. And then you get to figure it out, the next week when they all come in and introduce themselves, and basically see if you like any of the guys, and, see who's going to help. And usually that's pretty clear. So, it's kind of hearsay over on the player side of things, but yeah, that's.
I mean, and that was my biggest, like, wow, being inside the media room and seeing the narratives sort of run off to the races that weren't even true when we were inside the building, and actually getting the true context of the responses. I was like, wow, this is crazy. I mean, it really can run off, like if it's spun in a way that is, I imagine, can be frustrating when it's, a non-accurate report. Nate, you put out a really great article, I think today, and it kind of deep dives some of the dynamics of that first day and beyond. And I think the biggest thing Rams fans were probably frustrated by was they didn't take a wide receiver and an impact player right away. Give us some insight what your article is about that you put out, and also what your kind of experience with certain players in the environment that may have led to your article being written.
Yeah, that piece mostly just try to lay out the way they looked at the first round, the way it played out. So the Cliff Notes is basically they went into this. They always liked Ty Simpson. That's no secret at this point. They've been planning for the possibility to draft a quarterback ever since they added that extra first-round pick from the Falcons. It was supposed to be a quarterback draft much more loaded. That's why people thought maybe they'd wait a year. But Ty Simpson was a guy that was on their radar as of a year ago, and they were to the point where, though they wanted Jimmy Garoppolo back as their backup, they were prepared, if he came back, to still draft Ty Simpson and just create this learning environment and trust Jimmy to be the backup, just like he was this past season. Then you have two vets to learn from. They were open-minded to, they didn't want to just be so focused on one quarterback that they missed maybe another great player. So they looked into some other players like Mekhi Lemon and out of USC, Kenyon Sadiq out of Oregon, and then the Penn State guard Ayane. Those were all guys on their radar if Ty Simpson were gone. But, you know, they were pretty confident that it was going to play out that way. They had mapped out the top 12 players that they thought would go, and they almost were all in the order. So they're sitting there at number 13, and they're weighing, do we take a trade back just a few spots and where we still think we can get Ty, but we're not 1,000% sure. And it really came down to, was that worth taking? And as you saw the way the draft played out, they didn't really want to do a lot on day 3 because we mentioned it's hard to make this roster as a day 3 pick. It wasn't the greatest draft for that range of the draft. So any trade offers they got that were focused on picks after the 3rd round, that just didn't really jump out to them as being worth moving off of this plan. And so I think kind of the thing that I think got most missed in that pick, where it was such a focus of either such a binary debate of either impact player like Mekhi Lemon or Kenyon Sadiq or plan for the future with Ty Simpson. The way they looked at it was, if we take Ty Simpson and answer that quarterback dilemma right now instead of next year, they can go into this year's trade deadline and into next year's offseason, and all the draft picks are back open to be traded if they want. You know, they've been in, you know, the Rams, they're in trade conversations all the time. If there's a big name player out there, they're most likely at least checking in, and teams often will come to them knowing how much they want to deal. And a lot of these conversations that have gone on, they've had to say in the past several months, well, we can't trade from 2027 because they felt like, or 2026 at the top of the draft, because that quarterback thing was hanging out there. They never wanted to get into a spot where they trade 2 first-round picks, even if it, you know, gets them to a Super Bowl, but then they don't have, you know, Matthew Stafford retires and there's just nothing to really replace that quarterback with. So taking Ty now, I think that's going to lead to them being as aggressive as ever, at least exploring trade options now that they have those first-round picks available. And it could work out in their favor, where next year's draft is supposed to be the much stronger one than this, not just quarterback, but overall. So next year's first-round pick is going to be a more valuable asset than even the one that they sent out to get Trent McDuffie this year. So if they can get a Trent McDuffie in that trade, you know, they get excited about what else could potentially come. So I think from them, they looked at this in such a kind of big picture way, whereas a lot of us naturally are focused on the one decision they had at number 13. And that's where once you hear more of those insights, you can kind of understand where they came at it, even if you don't necessarily agree. I mean, I still think it's very fair to have said, you know, you could still get the impact guy right now rather than hope and see what's later. I think that's a fair take, but you can also understand the spot they were in where they said it wasn't one or the other. It wasn't future or impact. They're trying to find a way to do both. And for them, Trent McDuffie and Ty Simpson are a mix of both, but also opening up those trade possibilities for future draft picks. That's the other chance to go get the impact that they were looking for.
I love how fans are like, oh, it's like, you know, everyone seems to think they know how to construct a roster, because you have to think about what this impacts the future, right? How much, where you're, you know, even the tight end situation, I'll put myself in that same category. I was a little perplexed. I'm like, 5 tight ends I'm not sure. But then you think about it and you're like, 3 guys potentially next year could leave. Tyler Higbee is on a 2-year deal, but he's like, hey, I'm down to bounce. What if the Rams win the Super Bowl? Like, he's like, I'm good, peace. Thank you so much for playing. And then you've got Colby and Davis Allen, who are on expiring contracts, which leaves Terrence Ferguson. So to me, then it actually makes sense that the Rams take a tight end sort of on the higher side of the draft. And I love how the fans, I asked them, I'm like, when is the right time? And they're like, oh, get one in free agency. Like, one is just there for the taking. You know, Joe Burrow, one day, like, I get it. Playing for the Rams is attractive and appealing, but it's not like that's just something that, like, a Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford opportunity is just going to be presented on a silver platter, and it makes sense. Real quick, I do want to ask, and I know we're going to wrap things up, Rob, with that tight end pick and you being inside the Rams, you know, locker room for 11 years, do you by chance see the NFL as a whole evolving to more 12 and 13 personnel? Obviously, the Rams ran most 12, 13 personnel of any team last year. Do you see the league evolving into that?
I think there's a lot of trends in the league that happen. It kind of goes by waves. So I think as the Rams had success with 12 and 13 personnel, someone else is going to throw it in there. It's not like it's gone away entirely. It's not like the Rams reinvented it. It's just from what the Rams did in the past, they had the most in the league, and for sure how much they did in the past. So I feel like it's going to start kind of poking around, but the number one thing is you got to have the guys to do it. Tight end is an incredibly difficult position to play because you're undersized against pretty much everyone you're blocking. You might be slower than most other people who are trying to cover you. Maybe if you've got a good matchup with an inside linebacker or something, but you can't really rely on one thing to be like, hey, this is going to be my superpower in blocking. Because it's like, all right, you're giving up 20 pounds, or a safety drops down, and like, man, I'm giving up, 0.1 of a 40-yard time. And so you got to be able to have the horses to go ahead and do it. And I think that's one thing that the Rams kind of figured out last year, especially with injuries. It's like, man, we have a bunch of guys who can play. So let's see what happens. And I would assume that if that didn't go well, especially in that Jacksonville game, then it would have just gone away. But it just kind of kept building week after week after week. And now you go in and you get a Max Clare, and it's like, all right, great pass catcher. He's going to kind of the same thing as Ty. Like, everyone's talking about his blocking ability. It's like, man, their tight ends coach was a former offensive line coach, Scott Huff. So he's going to teach him how to block. They're going to try and, reshape his body a little bit, I'm sure, to get him more in line if that's what they wanted to do, or just have the versatility to do it. And then, like you said, maybe in a year, maybe he's got his hand in the ground a little bit more if he does see, playing time this year. And he's, from what everyone says, he's kind of split out catching passes. And I think just the versatility of all that the Rams have is just a fantastic thing. And honestly, I'm really excited to see it. But in terms of other teams doing it, I mean, you got to have the guys to be able to do it, to block, to catch, to know the pass concepts, to know the blocking concepts, to not have missed assignments, or we call them MAs. Like, all that's super important. And the Rams are just very lucky that they had a bunch of guys that cared and were able to do it.
Yeah. And as Nicole Blake, who's director of scouting on day 3 said, she said it kind of happened organically, obviously, with the Puka injury. You guys then started to sort of diversify the offense and then put the league on notice. And so this year's draft, in the second round, the most tight ends I think ever taken in history, to me indicates they're liking what they're seeing out of the Rams. And maybe it is a copycat league. We might see more of that. Anyways, I appreciate both of you. I know we have gone over. Rob Havenstein, our 11-year veteran with the Rams, Super Bowl champion offensive tackle. I didn't even get your take on the tackle, which we will get to because we get to talk to Rob, guys, each and every week when he has time. We appreciate your insight. And Nate Atkins of The Athletic, it really is so nice to have such professional, deep insight on the Rams. They took over the NFL draft. People love it. People not so much, and we just don't know until we know. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you for joining today.